This is an opening that we never saw before in the history of Disney, and probably never will again. The very existence of the Hunchback of Notre Dame sounds like a mistake. It's incredible that a script this dark and mature in tone, a Victor Hugo adaptation, was greenlit at all. But I'm not complaining. This is the sweetest accident that happened to Disney, introducing us to one of the most compelling, most memorable, and most monstrous villain in the history of the studio. Despite fulfilling the traits of your classic terrifying Disney villain, from physical appearance to the haunting voice, supported with a chilling epic score, Frollo stands out not because of the effort put into his design as a villain per se, but more due to the careful attempt to make him a human. He is a fully fleshed out character that reflects painfully human characteristics, behavioral patterns, and motivations. He's a terrifying villain because he sounds as close as a Disney villain could ever to a person any of us could meet in real life. Part of what gives Frollo that humanistic dimension is the balance, so to speak, between his purely sinister traits and seemingly compassionate demeanor. On the one hand, he exhibits traits that are outright cruel. His actions cannot be mistaken for anything other than plain brutality.
Ease up. Wait between lashes. Otherwise the old sting will dull him to the new.
That line about the lashes never fails to send shivers down my spine. It will always be unbelievable to me that this is a movie that was targeted at kids. At the same time, Frollo is a person who truly believes that what he does is completely justified. This depiction becomes all the more powerful when we see it driven by a sense of religious righteousness. One of the first lines that introduces him says,
"Frollo longed to purge the world of vice and sin."
He sees every horrible action he took as justifiable in one way or another. The Romani girl was followed and murdered because she supposedly committed the crime of stealing goods. Her son was about to be thrown in the well because he's a monster, a deformed demon that deserves to go back to hell where he belongs. And as we learn later, he's probably believed to be a product of witchcraft as well. Therefore, getting rid of him is justified because it's a sign of sin. And that's so terrifying because it's an accurate reflection of reality for a lot of people. It is very easy to look at Frollo and remember figures from your own life that use religion in the same way to justify the most toxic behaviors. Religion is one of the few areas where a person can rationalize harmful ideas while covering them with a sense of righteousness, where the most atrocious thoughts can be upheld under the claim that they serve purposes that are, on the contrary, righteous, compassionate, and contribute to the greater good, which is what God wants. This is one of those few instances where plain hatred can be claimed to come from a place of love. Anyone who has been gaslit in that way can easily identify the same pattern in Frollo's character. The entire movie centers Quasimodo, who has to go through a lot of suffering that was primarily caused by Frollo himself, yet we spend most of it watching Quasimodo being convinced again and again that his imprisonment was the right thing to do. It's for his own good, and even it might look like Frollo hates and abuses him, everything he does is claimed to come from a place of love, compassion, and protection. Being straight up evil in a way that creates a clear conflict with others is one thing, but successfully convincing your victim that they are the demons is way more vile because of the permanent psychological damage it can cause, and that's what makes Frollo one of the most twisted villains ever. Quasimodo is not Frollo's only victim. Another one of his characteristics that mirrors reality perfectly is his bigotry. His discrimination against the Romani people, again, is believed to come from a place of reason, concern for the order of society, and protection of religious values that are threatened by the Romani's people mere existence. He doesn't really hate those people just out of nowhere. It's because of their perceived defiance of societal norms. He just doesn't agree with their lifestyle. And because he sees himself as a figure of authority, he deems it his personal responsibility to protect society from those he sees as morally corrupt, chaotic demons. Also, since he has so much concern for religion, he finds it essential to interfere before their sinful behaviors spread like a disease in society. This is a sign that we can easily see in real life. Your average bigots are rarely transparent about their hatred for a group of people. Instead, their discrimination has to go through a process that always starts by demonizing marginalized marginalized groups. It has to first transform from an attack on those people into a mere innocent attempt at self-defense. The next step is to fixate on every minor inconvenience they have with those minorities and then blow that out of proportion and act as if they are the root of all and every issue in society. That's exactly what we see in Frollo. There is this one scene where his exaggerated fixation on Romani people is made clear when Phoebus points to how he was summoned from war to simply capture fortune tellers and palm readers, to which Frollo responds by saying that the real war is on Romani people, and that's what bigots excel at. Ignore the major issues and shift the attention to a small group of people to paint them as the real threat to society, and then justify acts of discrimination against them that are even more disproportionate to whatever danger they are claimed to be posing. The scene where Frollo crushes the ants as a means to symbolize what he wants to do with those people was quite a chilling yet powerful image. We can also notice that his desire to discriminate comes from a belief that he is superior. Because of his position in regards to social class and status, it is implied that he looks down upon others for being less wealthy and prestigious. He emphasizes the word peasants in his description of Romani people, which again goes only to show his hypocrisy, since he claims to be a voice of justice. But instead of having empathy towards those who are at the margins of society, he even uses that very vulnerability to marginalize them even further. One of the factors that the strength of a character depends on is their relationship with other characters, and that applies to villains. The more compelling a villain is, the stronger the main character, as their conflict is more solid and the stakes are higher. But the opposite is true as well. In this case, we feel Frollo's monstrosity more deeply because we see him working against a character that could not be more vulnerable, a character that suffers from enough alienation as is, but that suffering is weaponized to make him suffer even more and justify his abuse by Frollo. What makes this film unique as far as Disney movies go is how they didn't hesitate to depict a real reception of Quasimodo by society. They didn't limit the hatred to the villain, and instead showcased a society that is at large hateful and unaccepting of people like Quasimodo. So in the end, Frollo wasn't lying. Going out there among people was indeed dangerous to Quasimodo, and we saw that translate into one of the most gruesome scenes that has ever been attempted by Disney. But as painful as that image was, it was still powerful, and served to paint Frollo with an even more sinister brush, because of how cunningly he exploited that social tragedy to gaslight Quasimodo and use him to get to his own ends. Again, the most twisted villains are not those who are transparent about their motivations. It's often those who present on the surface motives that seem reasonable, relatable, and factual, to disguise their ulterior twisted motives.
The world is cruel.
Yes, that is true to an extent. One can argue it's a fact, but it's important to consider what a fact is used to push for. In this case, it is control and emotional manipulation. Quasimodo was so lonely with a serious need for company, care, and love that got to the point where he needed to create that company through what I believe is his pure imagination, represented by the gargoyles. His only idea of care and protection was constructed by Frollo, and that distorted his perception of the world. We see that in action as we follow Quasimodo in his journey of unlearning the vision by learning what it feels like to be truly protected and loved by Esmeralda. Even that kind of acceptance was so hard for Quasimodo to embrace, as he believed he didn't deserve it, showing yet again the kind of damage that Frollo has caused. And so this contrast and power dynamic between the two characters builds a very powerful antagonist that is complex enough to represent human destructive characteristics without sacrificing a cruelty that maintains his image as a true terrifying villain. Another layer that is added to Frollo's character is his internal conflict. See, he is not a really one-dimensional character, as he has traits that can oppose one another. Let's not forget that for Quasimodo to survive in this movie, Frollo had to go through a moment of conflict between the priest trying to convince him not to murder Quasimodo and the eyes of Notre Dame that made him feel a twinge of fear for his immortal soul. We see conflict and hesitance in his character, which led him to keep Quasimodo alive. Another instance where we see Frollo fighting being with two opposing internal powers is his feelings towards Esmeralda, which slowly get hinted at as the story goes. We see a tiny glimpse of that when Quasimodo points to how Frollo goes every year to the Feast of the Fools despite him claiming it's so terrible. He replies that as a public figure he must go even though he doesn't enjoy a moment of it, but we in retrospect learn that there may be another reason he makes sure to go there every time. We can then tell that those expressions of supposed disgust during the festival were just a means to disguise his desires for Esmeralda. Those feelings get more explicit as the movie goes. This scene where he sniffs Esmeralda's hair and says that he was imagining a rope around her neck is another instance that I find insane to be existing in a Disney movie. Frollo's burning desires climax into one of the most epic scenes in the history of the studio. Through the Hellfire song, we see the roots of the conflict that drives Frollo's character as well as his deepest nature. We see how he struggles with lust and an attraction to Esmeralda, that he then turns into cruelty and discrimination. Again, it is not crazy to see this type of behavior as a reflection of reality. A lot of viewers can make a connection between Frollo and people in their lives who attack others as a mechanism to suppress their own desires that they deem inappropriate. Using religious imagery and language particularly to represent that phenomenon is spot on. The Hellfire scene also shows us the thought process behind Frollo's actions. Even when he admits his desires towards Esmeralda, he still goes out of his way to make that her fault somehow, and therefore justification to either destroy her or control her and make her his own. And that marks the peak of his insanity. In his sick mind, people he sees as inferior have to either exist as his own possession or not exist at all.
Mine or you will burn!
In the end, despite the complexity of Frollo's character, and despite his reflection of deeply human characteristics, he still stands out as a truly sinister villain because that conflict, that inner struggle, was not enough to redeem him in any shape or form. On the contrary, from there on, we only get to see him take a decision towards even more extremism. In another shocking moment, we see him lighting a house on fire, knowing well there were innocent people, including children, in it. He then attempts to commit an atrocity and then vilifies Quasimodo yet again and blames him for his own brutal actions. Frollo's cruelty peaks when he insists to achieve his destructive plans until the very last breath without the slightest sign of redemption. It gets so extreme that he finally goes against the very institution that he used to shield himself with and justify his deeds, which is the church. He violates its rules and sanctity and actively seeks to damage Notre Dame, and by that erases the last ounce of respect and fear he once had towards that place.
And he shall smite the wicked and plunge them into the fiery pit.
Thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to this channel if you like the content here. Now I've got to say goodbye and see you in another video.